So that makes them 103 and 104 since the start of the 2024 season. And in that time, we've bitched about the roster. We've bitched about the manager. We've bitched about ownership. They've changed their spending. They've added good players. And they're still in the same spot. Now, Jared Krabbis was on this program yesterday and said if this is what they're going to be and the Red Sox aren't going to change, bring up the young guys. Let's at least see that and go from there. At least there is some sort of development taking place with some of the younger players so that by the time you get to next season, maybe you're actually in a better spot. I'm not ready to give up on this year yet. I think it's still too early for that. But I have a hard time disagreeing with you if you tell me you think they're effectively the same team, because they are. At least on paper, they are. So, for example, one of the big concerns about this team coming into the year was the bullpen. Last night, the bullpen lost another one. This time it was Aroldis Chapman who got the loss, but the night before, it was Greg Weissert. It doesn't really matter, whoever it is. The Red Sox now have 10 bullpen losses this year, which is tied for third most in baseball. And this is another thing I've said time and time again over the years. Those bullpen won-loss records are an important statistic because more games than ever get turned over to that bullpen. It's your bullpen versus their bullpen. So you know what the difference between the Red Sox and the Tigers is this year more than anything else? The bullpen one-loss record. If I have it right, I looked up the Red Sox are 9-10. You know what's the fewest losses in bullpen losses in the American League? The Tigers. They have 3, you have 10. They have the best record in the league. You have a 500 record. That game last night was about bullpens. One-run games, more often than not, about bullpens. They're about other things too. Fundamental things, moving runners, making contact, turning double plays, playing good defense, all of which the Red Sox struggle with. They've played a bad schedule to this point, and they're under 500. So if you look at the Detroit series and say, okay, they got swept, but prior to that, they were actually 2 games over, I would tell you 2 games over is not good enough for the schedule that they played. The Red Sox had an opportunity in the early part of this season to get out in front of it, build themselves a little cushion. They didn't do that. Now they're going to start playing some difficult teams or some talented teams. And if the losses pile up, they're going to be sub 500. The saving grace, and the only saving grace for them, is that nobody in the American League is running away from anybody else. So again, you tell me, what are they? They're bad in one-run games. In fact, 12 losses leads the major leagues. 10 bullpen losses, 10 for 21 in save opportunities, which ties to the bullpen one-loss record. The defense is still shaky. They struck out 14 times last night, and I need to know, before I say that I have an immense amount of faith, I haven't given up on them, but before I say I have an immense amount of faith in where this is going, you got to tell me how they're going to stop the strikeouts. Because I'm not sure that they really have a good way to do that. 617-779-0985. We'll kick it off tonight with John in the car. John, what do you got?
Hey, Tony. I think it's even worse than you're saying. Last 6 years, since the 108 and 54 year, they're 459 and 456. They've been a 500 team for 2/3 of a decade now, and I just don't see it changing.
Yeah, so John, you know what? Again, I gave some of these numbers, a few weeks back, where if you were to look at the 6-year sample, the 5-year sample, the 3-year sample, the 1 year you do have to sort of take out is 2021 because they played well that year, although I would tell you they got off to a good start. Then they kind of plateaued, and if you remember, on the final weekend of that year, they had to win their way into the playoffs. It went right down to the last day, and Rafael Devers had a big home run in Washington against the Nationals, and they got into the postseason, and then we remember that season fondly, but the fact of the matter is they kind of faded in the second half after the deadline. They had a chance to win the division at one point. They weren't aggressive at the deadline. They got Kyle Schwarber, but he was injured and couldn't join them till the middle of August. So, but again, to your point, slice the samples however you want. This year, last year and this year combined, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 500 team. Spending has gone down. It has come back up. Cora got suspended and came back. They've added players, subtracted players, and it's a 500 team. I honestly am running out of things to tell you. Sean McAdam's going to join us next. I see a couple of you on the line as well. Just sit tight. We'll ask Sean the same question, see what his thoughts are on the Red Sox when we come back on the baseball.
saves, the most in baseball, 4 of which Garrett Whitlock is responsible for. I think going into the season, everybody felt pretty good about Garrett Whitlock being in that role of multi-inning reliever, but he has given up. He has blown 4 saves, all of them since April 30th, 3 of them on this past trip, or at least 2 of them. That's an issue. They also are second in baseball in unearned runs allowed. So as much as they tried to work on the defense in spring training, it hasn't resulted in better play. It's not just that they're making errors. It's kind of when they make them, and then the pitching staff's inability to get out of those jams that the defenders have created with miscues. They are getting virtually nothing out of the cleanup spot. I think their OPS from the 4th spot in the batting order is about 550 between Casas struggling in the first month when he was healthy, and then an assortment of guys they tried there since he went down. It's a lot of little things adding up.
So, Sean, when like as we go through all this stuff, it's no singular thing, and I agree with that part of it. But have you been able to get any sense to this point? Is ownership, management, are they at all concerned at this stage? Because usually, I know that things have changed over the years, but 40, 45 games is always a little bit of a milepost where people would look at it and say, okay, we got a pretty good idea now as to what this team is. Now it's closer to 60 games, which is another 2 weeks. But I have to wonder if the Red Sox put a lot more into this team. Are they starting to worry?
If they're not, they should. As I said, there's kind of a disconnect there between going out and addressing some needs in the off season, filling them, and yet, kind of springing leaks elsewhere. I would say it was a statement of some sort that John Henry flew halfway across the country to try to, depending on what got said in that private meeting, either put out the fire with Rafael Devers or maybe kick him in the behind a little bit. But the fact that, this is a guy who did not seem very engaged with his team over the last few years, and to fly out to Kansas City with the general manager and team president. And I was told that was at his behest. That was his idea to go out. That, to me, signals a little bit of a sense of urgency from upstairs that they're not happy both with some of the stuff going on in the clubhouse and the end product on the field.
Right. Gotcha. So, in other words, if the team were playing well, he might have been less bothered by some of the Devers stuff, but he adds it all together, and all of a sudden now he's in Kansas City and saying, what the hell's going on here? Yeah.
I've got to think that was sort of not entirely in reaction to the Devers remarks from the day before, that maybe there had been some frustration building. He did greenlight more aggressive spending this winter. That's notable for the extension given to Crochet, for the aggressive tack that they ultimately took with Bregman. And he's probably wondering to himself, well, you guys told me that this was going to solve the problem, and yet here we are.
Sean, how surprised were you that he came out there? And I say out there. Yeah, I was going to say, you and I traveled together on that beat for a long time, probably, 15 years, somewhere in that area. Sean, I can't ever remember the owner showing up on the road, other than for a World Series game or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally, if there were another purpose, like I remember him showing up in Seattle in the mid-20 teens because he was attending a conference in Idaho, which wasn't very far away. Or if he had business to conduct in L.A., he might show up at Dodger Stadium and tie that into visiting the team, or going in Anaheim, where he had some interest. So, but not specifically to put out a fire or at least respond to one.
Yeah, never for the explicit purpose of dealing with a team issue, right? Like that was, yep. And Sean, honestly, when I heard and I'm going by Craig Breslow's comments here, so I'm putting some stock and belief in what Breslow said. But when Breslow was asked why they made the trip out there, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said essentially, well, we wanted to make sure that we express what our team values are. And it felt to me like they were letting Devers know they were unhappy. Whereas if you look at their history, typically when they meet with players, I always felt like they tried to appease them a little bit. I go back to 2011, the chicken and beer. Henry invited them onto his yacht. He gave them all headphones. David Ortiz lost to them, as it turned out, at the negotiating table. He was underpaid. They gave him a pickup truck. They gave him a plaque, celebrated him as the greatest clutch hitter in baseball history. So aside from the trip being rare, I feel like the message was also, I don't want to say out of character, because I'm sure Henry's expressed his displeasure at home when we don't know about it to lots of people in the ballpark. In fact, I'm certain of it. Mm-hmm. But I think he must be agitated to A, have flown there, and then B, to have handled it the way he handled it.
Yeah, I thought the Breslow remark about what we expect for being a good teammate was telling. This was, if you're reading between the lines, to me that translated into John Henry saying, hey, we're paying you $31 million a year. If we need you to help out at another position, then there's an expectation that you're gonna be more cooperative than you're showing. I don't think. I mean, I think some of it was a little symbolic and showing the commitment and being invested and all of that. But I'm not sure it was a rub his shoulders, pat him on the back kind of message that he got behind closed doors.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it, Sean. And again, I'm much more removed from it than you are. I'm speculating too, Tony. Obviously, I wasn't in Kansas City. I saw and read everything that you did, but it does not seem as if it was hand-holding, that there was more kind of finger-wagging involved. Sean, Kenny Rosenthal wrote something speculating on how Cora and Breslow may not have seen eye to eye on the Devers thing, and he's not the only one. I think a lot of people surmise that the fact that Cora didn't deliver the message or the request to Devers about moving to first base, and that Breslow did, spoke volumes. How do you look at Cora's whole role in this thing?
Yeah, I found that interesting and telling too, Tony, and wrote the same thing last week, that would ordinarily be the purview of the manager. If you're talking about free agency or contractual issues or larger organization-wide kind of things, then, yeah, the president of baseball ops or the general manager might be the guy having that conversation with the player. If this is about, hey, we just lost our first baseman for the year, we need to do some things here. How would you feel about at least taking some grounders in first and see how that goes? Ordinarily, that's the province of the manager, not the front office. And what we don't know is whether, that was Cora essentially saying, hey, look, I went to the well already with this guy back in spring training.
Right.
I smoothed things over when you asked him to be the DH, and we got him to do that, and he's finally settling into the role. In fact, Devers, if you can take away the first 5 or 6 games of the season, has had an OPS well over 900 since then and has adapted to the DH spot, maybe quicker than a lot of us expected. But I kind of thought, my take is from the outside looking at that's Cora saying, hey, look, if you're asking me to do this again, let's give it some time. And maybe Breslow thought, we don't have time, I'll do it. But I did find it curious that it was Breslow doing the asking.
Yeah, it's out of the ordinary. I don't think there's any question it's out of the ordinary. Again, we're speaking with Sean McAdam of Mass Live on the Volkswagen Dealers Expert Hotline. Sean, before we let you go, and this is sort of a loaded question, and when I say loaded, I mean a longer answer than a short one, but nonetheless, when you look at all their problems, how many of them are solvable? So, for example, like the one I'm hung up on, Sean, is the strikeouts, the number of strikeouts, their inability to put the ball in play. And I'm talking about the strikeouts from an offensive standpoint, obviously. But some guys just strike out a lot. That's just what they do. And it feels like they have a lot of them. So whether it's Trevor Story or Devers himself or Wilyer Abreu, Casas when he was here, Jarren Duran, Connor Wong, like, it feels like they have a lot of guys in that lineup that swing and miss. How do they fix that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point because I think when you're an established big leaguer and have had some success and it comes with kind of an issue like striking out, there's a tendency to think like, well, that's just who he is. And to a degree, I think that's accurate. But I would point you to a guy that we talked about earlier, and that's Aroldis Chapman, who they have, to the credit of Andrew Bailey and anybody else that's got their hand in the pitching program over there, they've been able to cut his walk rate significantly this year. Now, I know it came back to bite him last night. He walked the leadoff guy, and it ended up croaking them. That's the winning run that scored and cost them the game. But his walk rate, which Andrew Bailey talked about, I remember speaking to him in spring training and was kind of asking the question, along what the lines of what you're asking, is it too late to change some of these guys' stripes? And Bailey thought he could do some things mechanically, specifically to get Chapman ahead of hitters more often than he had been. As you know, there's a huge difference in the outcome of an at-bat when you're 1-0 versus 0-1. And they've done a good job there. So that tells me that even for a guy like Chapman, who's been around for 15 years and is 37 years old and has bounced around with 7 or 8 teams, whatever it's been, you can still affect some change and improvement. And if you can do that from the pitching side, you should be able to teach guys to at least be a little more disciplined and have better swing decisions. But it's not something that comes overnight.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question for you, which is really, again, sort of a big picture kind of question. But if you're a fan right now of the Red Sox, you bought back in because you thought this year was going to be better, and now they're 22-23. Should you be worried?
Yeah, you should definitely be concerned. I don't think it's time to give up on the season. They're fortunate that they are as close to first place as they are, being eminently mediocre through those 45 games. They're only 4 out. They're right in the middle of the wild card race. As you know, in the current playoff format, Tony, if you hang around 500, by definition, you're a playoff contender. So the bar is not set as high as it once was. And I think you see some areas that have been improved, and certainly getting a number one guy like Crochet is key, and getting a right-handed bat and upgrading third base, as Bregman has done, is important. So I think they've underachieved, and that suggests that they're better than they've played, even if it hasn't worked out that way through the first 7 weeks.
Yeah, I don't need to tell you. People need to start seeing it. I think we are, including people in that building there. And I'm obviously talking about ownership and management, but it's a long season. We all know it, probably too long. We'll see. Again, to me, I think people are frustrated. And I would argue both in and out of the organization. But anyway, Sean, listen, good talking to you.
Okay, Tony, thanks.
All right, Sean McAdam, Mass Live, via the Volkswagen Dealers Expert Hotline. We're a little behind here, so Kevin Majori will get you caught up. a breaking ball. This happens.
So it brings up Javi Baez. 3-run home run. He popped back in the 6th. The two-time All-Star, after some really rocky years here to start his time in Detroit, has resurfaced. First pitch, Baez launches. Left field at the wall, and it is over.
So there you go. Another one, same thing. They made the same mistake twice in a row. And the Red Sox do a lot of this. They make mistakes, and when I say they repeat them. So when I say this stuff that I hate the way they pitch. I can't stand the way they pitch. And, now that I think of it, Craig Breslow was brought in to change the Red Sox pitching program. You know what Breslow was? A guy who threw like in the high 80s. So you know why he didn't throw fastballs? Because his probably got pounded. So now they've adopted this whole idea we're going to spin the crap out of it, and they get spun all right into the seats. These things get pounded. It feels like it anyway. Weissert in particular gets killed on his breaking ball, and they keep throwing it. Blows me away. The fact that they strike out a ton, I said this to Sean McAdam when he was on, so I'll tell you what, let's bring in Brian in Florida who claims that he has a solution on how to solve the strikeout problem that is afflicting Red Sox hitters. So go ahead, Brian. What do you got?
I'm not sure the Red Sox want to go there, but the answer seems pretty simple to me. You put Rafaela and Story on the bench. You bring up Meyer and Anthony, move Devers to first, and then let Yoshida DH. He's a contact guy, and certainly couldn't be any worse. In fact, I think it has potential to be a lot better.
So, look, Brian, what you're talking about is personnel changes, which, again, I'm hardly against. Anthony strikes out a lot, though, too, and I think Meyer strikes out a fair amount. Now, again, I'm all for the new blood, but this brings me to a separate topic. I hate the fact that Meyer and Anthony aren't here yet. Now, Meyer, I understand a little bit more because Meyer didn't have any time at AAA last year, so I understand that. Anthony was ripping it up earlier in the year, and they could use the bat now that Casas is out. So why Anthony's not here is beyond me. But, and I'm going to try to explain this to you without giving you a popsicle headache. When the Red Sox put Christian Campbell on the roster this year, one of the reasons for them to do it is that if Campbell wins the Rookie of the Year award, and this is true of any rookie, you get an extra draft pick out of it. So Major League Baseball was starting to get annoyed that teams were keeping good prospects down in the minor leagues too long so that they could get an extra year of service out of them. Instead of 6 years, you'd be able to get them for 7. Once you get 6 full years in baseball, you're eligible for free agency. But if you start a guy late, then it's really 6 3/4. Okay, so you can fudge it. So to get rid of that, MLB said, well, look, if you bring a guy up and he wins the Rookie of the Year, you'll get an extra draft pick to give teams an incentive to put those guys on the field. So Campbell broke with the team in part for that reason. But that is also potentially part of the reason Anthony and Meyer are not coming up. Because in other words, why waste the chance that Anthony could win the Rookie of the Year if Campbell's going to win the Rookie of the Year? We only get one pick out of it. So if we preserve rookie status for both Marcelo Meyer and Roman Anthony, and we bring them up at the end of this season or later in this season, they won't get enough at-bats to qualify as rookies, and they can win the award next year. This all gets very convoluted, but to qualify for the Rookie of the Year, you have to get a minimum number of at-bats. I think it's 50 games for a positional player. I'd have to go back and look. It used to be 50 games for a positional player, 50 innings for a pitcher, something like that. Might have been 100 at-bats. I can't remember. But if you prevent a player from getting that, then he doesn't qualify. He can't win the Rookie of the Year because he doesn't play enough. He can get it the next year.
Tony, it's 130 at-bats, 50 innings pitched, or 45 days on the active Major League roster.
Okay, so 45 days on the active roster means they'd have to be up before the middle of August, basically. Okay, that's roughly. So as long as you don't bring a guy up before the middle of August, you can bring him back next year and he can still be a rookie. And you have another crack at a draft pick. So is that what's going on here? Are the Red Sox playing that game? And if they are, what happened to thinking about the present more than the future? Because again, then they're angling it all for the future. They're not making decisions on the roster based on what's good for the 2025 Red Sox, or frankly, they're not even making them for what's good for the Red Sox on the field. They're making them for what's good for the Red Sox in the draft process, which annoys the hell out of me. Drew's in Boston. Drew, what do you got?
Hey, Tony, so I know you have a love affair with Alex Cora, and I'll never understand why, but what I want to understand is, with all the things that the team does poorly, because you've already gone on and tried to figure out what they do well, what is Alex Cora, in your mind, specifically responsible for? Because if it's not the bad fielding, if it's not the bad hitting, if it's not the bad pitching, if it's not the guy moving over when the team needs him to play a different position, if it's not, it's not, it's not. What is he actually responsible for, so I can tie it to something if he's good or bad?
Yeah, so Drew, listen, you're asking a good question, and I'm not as much of a Cora supporter as you think I am. I think Cora's a good game manager. I do. I think he's manipulative with the media. I think that he's manipulative in his clubhouse, although not as bad. I said last week, yeah, he's going to go down to me. If this thing doesn't change, he's going to go down as the Bobby Valentine of this generation. Now, look, Valentine never won a World Series, but he manipulated the media. Cora's players like him better than they liked Valentine, or than Valentine's players like Valentine. You get the idea. But your point's a good one. His job, generally the job of a manager now, is really about overall, I would say, team morale and focus. Keep everybody pointed in the right direction. Keep everybody happy. The managers got very little to do with the product on the field now. That's all run by the analysts. And the theory is that if you keep the players mentally in a good place, they'll produce. Now, in terms of pitching changes, things like that, how do you manage your way around a bad bullpen? You can't. If you have bad pitchers, it's tough to get around. So do I think Cora is the reason they're losing? No. But do I think he's helping them? No, I don't. I don't. And so the manager takes too much of the credit, too much of the blame in baseball anyway. You know, people make their decisions. You know why people like Terry Francona was so popular? Because they won and he was likable. That's it. It was that simple. Tell me one move that he made that you would call genius. Jim is in East Weymouth. Jim, what do you got?
All of them.
Yeah, Tony, I just couldn't understand. They saw what Baez did the first time at bat. I can't believe they didn't walk him, Tony.
Yeah, so, Jim, I don't know that I would have walked him because I think at the time there were runners on first and second. You can pitch to him without walking him. I know he's having a good year, but they made the same mistake. They threw the same pitch in the same spot, essentially. So if you hang the breaking ball, and by the way, I don't think much of Weissert as a pitcher. To me, he's the kind of guy that doesn't know where it's going. So the stuff looks live, but he doesn't necessarily command it. And it's only as good as where you put it. So they got a bunch of guys with some big arms that don't necessarily know where it's going. But the overall pitching philosophy, I can't stand it. They throw four-seam fastballs, fewer than about or less than about 70% of the teams in baseball. They're in the bottom 20%, 30% of teams that throw fastballs. And they got some guys that have some pretty good ones. All right, Joe Murray coming up next. Kevin Majori will get you caught up on headlines. Agenda-free Friday for Felger and Mass tomorrow, and we'll have our usual Friday show here on the Baseball Hour as well. We'll see you then.
The Baseball Hour with Tony Mass.
Boston Celtics.